There is a whole process of denial and repression. And I think that what's really significant is that for many years now people were trying to deny that it ever happened, that it ever happened to them, or if it did happen, that it afflict them in any particular way. So that it's better to forget about it. You shouldn't be talking about it because father will get upset, I'll get my nightmares, mother will cry. So let's pretend it's never been. It's never happened. And you see, personally speaking, see, I was unable to read any books, for instance, okay, about the Holocaust. Until very recently, I didn't read one word about the Holocaust. I was never able to watch any movies about the Holocaust, okay? And I was pretending very hard that it never happened to me. Anyway, to cut a long story short, my wife said, well, you know, you've been trying to run away for a long time, so why don't you confront it? And there were really very interesting, psychologically interesting things that happened since. But the most important was that for the first time there was this Holocaust movie on television. Now, it's not important whether it was good or artistically good or whatever. So for the first time I decided to watch it with my family. And it was a moving experience, okay? So at one point, by the end of it, we were all crying. And my 9-year-old daughter said to me, hey Daddy, you're crying. I said, yeah, and you're crying too. She said, yeah, but no, I cry from time to time, but I've never seen you cry. I said, well, you know, I'm human. I do cry from time to time. It's really not as much as you do, but, you know, I can remember times when I cried. I asked her, why do you cry here? And she said, well, I cry for all those poor people. Why do you cry? And I said, well, you know, I really cry for myself. I said, because, he said, well, what? And she said, what do you mean for yourself? And I said, well, you know, I was a part of it. I went through those miseries. And she looked at me, she said, Daddy, I never knew. Why didn't you tell me? You know, for once in my life I was speechless. I realized I wasn't able to tell her. And although, you know, we have very good communication, we talk about almost everything there is. I was born in Kraków, Poland in 1938, March 1938, to an upper middle class family. My father was a lawyer. My grandfather was a wealthy merchant and dealer in precious gems. When the war broke out, there was still a possibility to run away. And financially speaking, probably my family had the finances to run away. But my grandfather ruled against it, and being, you know, old world, patriarchal type of person, so of course once he ruled there was nothing to do. And his rationale was that he has known the Germans for all his life. He knows the culture, he knows the people, he's been trading dealing with the Germans all his life, and he knows that those are honest, cultural, hard-working, the best people in the world. People at that time didn't really believe. I don't think that anyone around the world believed that something like that might happen. So my father, later on, under German occupation, being a Zionist leader, he was trying to talk people into going into hiding, into running away, and so on and so forth. He was considered at that time, this was around the year 1940, 1941, and that he was at that time, I think 1940s, he was considered as a madman. No one would listen. In 1942 we were moved to the ghetto. The ghetto at one point was still open, which means that we could go to the outer city, okay? And I remember distinctly one thing, that my grandmother, who was a very religious and very orthodox person, told my mother to go out and take me with her and to buy me some ham. Now, ham was something that was never seen in our household, being so religious. And my grandmother said, well, you know, this is the food that you can give the child, but I don't want it in this house, so don't bring it home. I think that it registered to me because it was maybe the first double message of the kind of a double message that I ever heard, and therefore I distinctly remember not exactly understanding why did she say it's okay to buy it, but don't bring it home. So only years afterwards I realized what this woman really went through, probably, in order to, you know, to try to somehow supplement the diet. And then my first, I'd say, very vivid memory was around this time. This must have been the winter of 1942. And I was about 4.5 years old, and I was sick. I had an inflammation of the inner ear. It was in terrible pain, and they had to take me to the doctor, and I was crying, but there was a curfew at that time. For some reason there was a curfew until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So my father was very impatient to take me to the doctor, to have my ears pierced and my drums pierced, and once it was 4 o'clock, he took me on his arms and we went out of the house on the sidewalk, and right at the entrance, vis-a-vis the entrance, was this German soldier. I can still, as a matter of fact, hear the click of the breech, you know, how when it was loaded, and I can still hear my father crying, you know, in a very high-pitched voice, "Nicht schießen, nicht schießen, don't shoot, don't shoot, it's, the curfew is over." And this guy was a German soldier. He stopped, he looked at his watch, and it was 4 o'clock, so he lowered the rifle. And we were allowed to go. In beginning of 1943, the ghetto was closed down, and we were moved to a concentration camp in Płaszów, which is nearby Kraków. It's like a suburb of Kraków. and this was a labor camp. You could take with yourself only what you can carry. So you didn't carry bedspreads or pillows or things like that. So my, once again, this very vivid recollection is of my uncle negotiating, talking to people, maybe someone has a pillow for the child. And eventually he got hold of a pillow which was partially torn, and you know, I can see the dawn kind of breaking away, flying all around, but it was a pillow, it was a luxury, it was a great thing. So I had this kind of a pillow for to put myself on, which was a great thing. But I do have a very vivid memory of arriving there. Okay, that's this once again. This is like, you know, looking at a picture, and this once again, because this was in a total contrast. It was not moving from a let's say 6-bedroom apartment to a 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom apartment. It was like moving from to different planets. And you know, we were living, as you must have seen in various photographs or movies or whatever, in those how do you call them, huts or barracks, and living on kind of platforms. I guess, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 inches of head space, I should say body space. So you really had to crawl in. They held a kind of a family discussion of what to do, and they decided that I'll stand better chances in getting out, trying to be on my own. And there was a practical problem of, first of all, how are they going to break the news to me. I overheard this whole discussion. Okay, it was going for a couple of nights. So I knew what's coming. So my reaction was very, very calm, as a matter of fact. This guy Pemper was supposed to stage a diversion at the gate, okay, trying to pull the guards' attention away with a bottle of vodka, which he somehow got. And at that time, they gave me the address, and they decided that it was a pretty straight walk. So I was supposed to walk out. And once again, we had this parting talk. They tied the scarf on me, and my mother gave me, which, you know, speaking logically, it was a stupid thing to do. But to me, it meant really everything. My mother gave me her student ID, high school ID, with a picture in it. She says, well, you keep my picture, you know, so when we meet again.
When we meet again, what did it mean to you?
Well, they said to me that when the war is going to end, they made a promise. When the war is going to end, they're going to come for me. And I realized, you know, after many, many years, how much, what does it mean for me to promise something? When you promise something, it's no matter what happens, what catastrophes, what hardships do you have to overcome, what does it mean to you? If you give your word, if you promise something, you have to do it. There is no way out. This is what I believed. In this way, to me, it was as, you know, this. If they say that they are coming for me, they will come, and this is something that kept me going. I don't remember the walk particularly. I remember the place that I got to. Now, I didn't know at that point that it was a whorehouse. People who were living on the verge of society were kind of helpful to one another, and being Jewish meant automatically being included on the marginal side of society. I met some people around it, and I was showing this address, and they told me this is the house over there, and so forth. But I remember a woman, opening a door now. Remember, only women. To me, they were all dressed in white, and everything in this house was white. And only later I realized why. Because when I got in, they gave me a glass of milk. And this was how this milk kind of colored everything white. So after the war, we were kind of trying to retrace the ordeal, where I went and so on and so forth. And after the war, I said that it was a hospital. And my parents kind of laughed at it in all the years afterwards. When I was, sometimes mentioning the hospital, I was considered already grown up. So they said no, that they told me the real story, that it was really a whorehouse. I stayed there for about 3 months. And after 3 months, it was folded down by the Germans, who took the women to work for them in their army installations, like they used to. And at that point, I was left alone. And to say left alone is not, it's not exactly true, because I wasn't alone. Because there were other children, orphans, displaced, roaming the streets. And you ganged up with other kids. And you lived according to the laws of nature. I mean, no one was there to tell us that it's improper to steal, that it's not becoming to beg. I was really lucky because I was blonde. I was kind of straw blonde, and so I didn't really resemble a Jew. Yes, one more point was that my parents told me that no matter what happens, don't let your pants down. Okay? Don't let your pants down. And I had the sense of being different, of being Jewish, as a matter of fact. It was the summer, which we were on the streets and so on and so forth. Then came a time in which it was beginning to be cold. And I had the good luck. I was begging one day, and a Polish woman took me in. And somehow the husband of this woman got involved in some black market activities or whatever it was, and they got arrested. Once they got arrested, I was again on my own.
Did they know, do you think, that you were a Jew?
Probably they did. Yes, probably they did. To me it's serious, although it sounds like a joke. But at that point I was like 70 years old. I was a real old man. I was short, but I was old. And the whole responsibility of the whole world for myself, I knew that this is what I have to finally rely upon is myself. Well, it was autumn 1944, and once again, after being on the streets, there was an old lady who lived in a cellar. It's a kind of underground apartment, small apartment, and she picked me up. Once again, I met her and she brought me to her house, and it turned out that she was living with the grandson, and her son being doing some forced labor in Germany, and the grandson died a couple of weeks before she met me, so she was still in the grieving process, and I think that this helped me in the way that she wanted someone to live with. And first of all, it was the first time that I had papers. Now they buried the child, with not making it legal, probably thinking about selling the papers or whatever. Now, papers at the time were worth probably the weight in, or the size in diamonds, not in gold. So I was given his papers, and I had a name, okay? So my first name was Menachem, which is a purely Polish name. It has a great sound.
Would you say it again?
Menachem. That's Matthew Rainbow. And this was also, but this time I was kind of already, my autonomy was curbed at this time, because I became, this woman's grandson. So I had to do a few things which I didn't know how to do, is to pray. I have to learn the prayers. And I had to go to church. The prayers I found, I didn't like to do the prayers. I wouldn't say that it was out of the sense of my Jewishness that I didn't like to recite Our Father and whatever. But I didn't like it. And as primitive as this lady was, I'd say that she had a wonderful sense of what's important and what's not important. And by that time I revealed to her that I have a treasure, and this is the picture of my mother's. So she agreed that every night before bedtime I will pray, like I suggested, to the picture of my mother rather than to the crucifix, or the picture of Jesus or whatever it was. I used to put this picture on and to pray, God, make this war end, and please let my mother come back and get me. But that time, it was the winter of 1944, it was very cold and life was rather miserable. At that time we didn't have enough to eat, and life was very hard at that time. So it turned out that this woman had a sister who was living in a village nearby, not very far from Kraków. And she sent me to her sister. By the way, the sister was hiding a woman, a Jewish woman, and her daughter too. Well, they were this woman and her daughter. She was older than I was. And the interesting thing was that the sister that I came with didn't know that her sister is hiding Jews. Okay? So of course she didn't tell her sister that I'm not her grandson, but that I'm a Jew that she's hiding. Okay? So for a couple of months I was living there not knowing that in the same house 2 more people are hiding. But the funniest thing about it is, anyway, is that the woman that I was staying in her house, one night said to her husband, tonight we're not going to sleep at home, we're going to the neighbors or whatever. He said, you crazy woman. What do you mean you're not going? He said, well, I had this dream, which my mother came to me, so she says, and she says that this house is unsafe. Well, you know, in this primitive Polish setting, I mean, once a mother or father appear in a dream, it's a command, so you can't do anything about it. So we left everything and we went to sleep with the neighbors, and the house was destroyed. A bomb or an artillery shell fell on it and it was wiped out. So it kind of makes you wonder. It only makes things more difficult. You ask yourself the questions, you know, why? Or why did I survive? And anyway, I met with my parents in the summer of 1945. It was a very traumatic meeting. I had the picture of my mother, but of course she didn't resemble my mother at all. They were still dressed in the prison camp clothes with those white stripes. They were really emaciated, and my father looked terrible. He was tortured. And he had all his teeth hanging out, you know. It was nothing that I had. I just couldn't believe that they were my parents, as a matter of fact. I think that this was the hardest part of it all, to accept them again. And this was something that, on one hand, you know, wanted so badly to happen, and then when I was confronted with those disfigured people, I just couldn't force myself to go and to make any contact with them. I knew that they were my parents, logically, but emotionally, I didn't feel anything towards them. And I used, for some period, to address them in this, by calling them Mr. and Mrs. I just couldn't bring myself to accepting them. And it took me a while until I was able to accept them, something that kind of haunted me for many, many years. And once I was safe again, I suppose, this is where I disintegrated. I developed fears. I couldn't sleep. I started having nightmares. Now, nightmares, they were totally abstract, but they were always repeat themselves. And, were kind of three themes that eventually boiled down to kind of a surrealistic, abstract representation of a feeling of helplessness. It was like a conveyor belt, okay, in which I was moving toward a press that was rolling, a roll press, and there was no power whatsoever to stop it. I couldn't move. I was just rolling closer and closer. And I would wake up totally disoriented, crying my head off, terrible screaming, all sweat and shaking. I could never go back to sleep. And this went on for many years, until at one time I stopped dreaming. Which, I know that it sounds weird because you never stop dreaming. But I somehow managed totally to repress all dreams. And I felt that I'm free from dreaming. I'm telling this particular story with a goal in mind. And when Dr. Lau called me initially and he asked me if I'd be willing to participate in this program, and my initial reaction was no. Then he said, well, why don't you think it over? I said, okay. But I was resolved at that time that I'm not going to do it. And it was really of the fear of once again trying to revive the things that I was trying so hard to repress, like we all did. But anyway, my wife asked me what it was all about, and I told her, and she said, well, what are you afraid of? And I said, well, I'm scared. I'm really scared that everything will come back in my nightmares and so on and so forth. He said, well, you've been living with this thing now for 34, 35 years after the war, and you're still afraid. You've never talked about it. And it didn't work because you're still afraid, still anxious. So why don't you try it the other way? And we spent a lot of time talking about it. I started to see the logic. And this particular night, we went to bed very early in the morning. So we talked it for the better part of the night. And the next night, I had my nightmares again. But this time it was different. It was again the conveyor belt, it was again the rolling presses. It was again the feeling of helplessness and of terrible anxiety. And for the first time in my life, I have stopped the conveyor belt. I woke up, still feeling very anxious. But this anxiety has turned into a wonderful sense of fulfillment and satisfaction. I got up. For the first time, I wasn't disoriented. I knew where I was. I knew what happened. And Somehow for the first time I was able to do it. I feel strongly that it has to do with the fact that I decided to open up, to discuss it. It has to do with the fact that it's been too long repressed. We have to come up and we have to talk about it. And therefore, I had this thought, if you participate in this kind of program, is it only for the sake of the other people? I think that for me, it serves another purpose, a very personal one. Trying to deal with my feelings. As I said in the beginning, for the past 35 years I've been trying to convince myself that it never happened. That maybe it happened, but I wasn't affected. I walked under the rain without getting wet. This was my fantasy. It's only now I started to realize how my whole life was really shaped by those experiences. But it took me a while to realize. The thing that I'm troubled right now, one of the things that I'm troubled with is, if we don't deal with our feelings, if we don't understand our experience, what are we doing to our children? I have realized it when my first daughter was born. For a very short moment, I suspected it might be something that I'm doing as a reaction. And this was right before right after I delivered her. I delivered my children myself, being a gynecologist, and that's a privilege. It was very important to me. So I went on a kind of a minor spree, buying spree, but it was still a spree, binge. I spent a couple of £100 on toys. And I bought all kinds of toys that you usually don't buy for a newborn, like electric train, like a pedal car. I very proudly prepared everything in the room for my daughter, who was 3 days old when she came home with my wife. My wife looked at the things and she said, why did you buy all this? I said, what do you mean, why did I buy all this? A child needs to have toys. He said, yes, but you see, it will take years before she'll be able to play with them. I said, what do you mean it will take years? A child needs toys. I just bought some toys. What's wrong with a child having toys? And it took me a long time to realize that what I was doing, I was finally buying toys for myself. And this was, the start of my wondering, really, what are we doing to the next generation? And we are as we are. can change some, we will never be able to eradicate what happened. We might try to understand some of the dynamics, but we will never be able to wipe it out. It will always live with us, and let's face it, I'm facing it now. The big question is, what will become of those? Are we transferring our anxieties, our fears, our problems to the generations to come? And this is why I feel that we are talking here not only of the lost generation, like they did, like the term they coined after World War I. This time we're dealing with lost generations. It's not only us, it's the generations to come. And I think that this is the biggest tragedy of those that survived.